Okay, so we're here at Paul Revere's house. And first of all, I'm going to tell you guys who Paul Revere was. Paul Revere is the son of a French Huguenot by the name of Apollos Revere. A Huguenot is just another name for a Protestant. The Protestants at that time were fleeing France because we had a Catholic king in France. So quite a number of them came out here to the colonies, into the New World. Most up to Canada, but quite a number down to Boston as well. This man, Apollos Revere, he was a goldsmith. He trained his son Paul to be a goldsmith and a silversmith. He changed the name to a more American sounding name, and his son became known as Paul Revere. He was a man of many talents. He was a metalsmith. He was the maker of bells, where he made his major money. His jingle to sell his bells were, the bigger the bell, the sweeter the tune. And of course he's selling the bells by the pound weight, and that's why he, at the end of a long life, died out of Canton as a very wealthy man would imagine out in Canton. He was also a man who could make false teeth. Not a full set, but he could make a plate with 2 or 3 teeth. That is important, as we'll discuss later on today. He's also a very physically strong man. And when the Patriots needed a rider to go down to Philadelphia or to New York, they would call upon Paul Revere, because that ride entailed riding a horse 20-25 miles per day, holding up at night, changing the horse, repeating the process over and over again. It was not every man that could do that. That's physically very demanding. He had a mentor by the name of Dr. Joseph Warden. Dr. Joseph Warden, he's an intellect. He's the leader of the Patriot movement up here in New England. He's on the same level intellectually as Thomas Jefferson. I say that because he was the man that penned what was known as the Suffolk Resolves. The Suffolk Resolves are the answer to the intolerable acts that the English Parliament passed to punish the people of Boston. He was also a soldier, so he was in that way similar to George Washington, so he had the better parts of both. Unfortunately, he did not survive the revolution.
But not bad.
Now, he was a member of the upper class. He was a Harvard-educated medical doctor. Dr. Joseph Warden was.
Yeah.
Paul Revere is of the middle class, or what that time is known as the middling class. So in the normal course of events, these two men would have nothing in common or no reason to be friendly with one another. The reason they had something in common was because Paul Revere is a member of the Freemasons here in Boston. And Dr. Joseph Warden, he is the Grand Master of the St. Andrew's Lodge of the Freemasons in Boston. That is the connection between the two of them. They developed a close friendship. It would have been mentor and protege. Now, because Paul Revere was a strong man with what today we would know as street cred, he was able to get a group of people, a faction if you like, a street gang, and mold them into a political force to do their bidding. And this is where the embryo of the Sons of Liberty formed. And their political, what they wanted them to do was they wanted them to act as a sort of a physical, strong-arm force to go to a merchant who was intent on paying his taxes and advise him politely that should he pay his taxes, his house or his shop might catch fire, be struck for lightning. Anything can happen when you're not doing what they want. Now, we're coming back to Paul Revere's house. This house here is the house in which Paul Revere lived in for 30 years between the years 1770 and 1800. In that time period, he will have had 2 wives and 15 children, 5 of which did not reach adulthood, which is about average for the time with childhood disease. Paul Revere himself actually outlived all but 3 of his children. When he bought this house in 1770, it's already 90 years old. So this house is built in the year 1680, and that places it as the oldest house in downtown Boston.
Wow.
Now, the house that existed before this house was built was destroyed by a great fire that happened 2 years before that. And the occupant of that original house on this site was a man called Increase Matter, who was one of the early reverends or ministers in Puritan New England. He is a man who, in his own right, is much more famous and important than Paul Revere, but he is sort of lost to history. Now, if we look at this, there's a few things of note on this house here. If we look at this door, when Paul Revere lived here, he would have driven those metal bolts or spikes into his door as a sign of affluence, because metal was very scarce in those days. It was used as small change. So by him driving the metal into his bolts, he was able to say to his neighbours that I am a man of substance here, I'm a man of some affluence. Now, however, if you go back 100 years before that, the practical reason for driving metal or nails or studs into your house door is more apparent. It's called, as I said, an Indian door or a pirate door. Should an Indian or pirate attack your house, he would be using his hatchet or sword or his tomahawk to try to beat in and destroy the door. These metal bolts will significantly slow him down. While he's being slowed down, the house here, as you can see, juts out on the first floor. There will, at that time, be small, narrow slits, maybe 2 feet in length, maybe 6 inches wide, cut in here. And while the Indian is striving to break down the door, the man inside has time to put his musket out through the slit and shoot the Indian. Now, if it's the neighbour next door that might be visiting his wife too often and keeping her occupied too much, he might throw out something else to give her sort of a hint as to it's time to move on. That is the reason for the Indian door. This post here is the original hitching post. Men of note will have ridden their horses up here to Paul Revere's house. They will have tied their horses to this exact post and they will have gone inside to speak to Paul Revere. Now, before we move on, I want to say a bit about the glass here. This glass is not original to this house, but it is from the same time period. In colonial times, glass is very, very expensive. It being an expensive item, somewhat similar today, it is the target for taxation. Houses will be taxed in proportion to the size of your glass windows. Obviously, as people wish to pay less taxes, some people diminish the size of their window. Some people actually boarded up the window completely to bring it to zero. But if you diminish the size of the window, the amount of daylight going in through the window is diminished. And that is where we get the expression today, taxing the daylights out of a person. Now, there's a lot of old sayings that I'll mention in the course of the day. Now, if you look at this building here, you will see it's wooden. It is of European medieval architecture. The jut out here that you see, some people say that that is also to do with taxation, because in Europe, your ground floor was taxed by the ground area. So when you get out to the first floor, you push it out and grab a few extra square yards.
That's why they did that.
Well, that's one reason, but the better reason is in colonial cities, in medieval cities in Europe, the sewage system is what we call today an open sewer that flows up the middle of the street. The chamber pots will be emptied out the windows by the lady of the house, that would be her job, into the middle of the street. So, today, if a man is a gentleman, he always walks his lady to the inside and he walks to the outside of the sidewalk.
In case there is a dump.
Because if there is a splash, the gentleman shields the lady from the results of the splash.
Would you do that for me, honey?
Well, it was... He lived here for, as I said,